The transport shuttle's engines whined as they powered down, steam hissing from the docking clamps that secured the small craft to Nexus Station. Captain Liana grabbed her worn duffel bag and slung the leather rifle case across her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of her old companion pressing against her back as the airlock cycled open. A wave of perfumed air rushed in, carrying scents she couldn't identify, exotic flowers from distant worlds, rare spices worth more than most people's yearly income, and the metallic tang of advanced technology. She stepped onto the gleaming deck, her military boots making soft thuds against the polished crystal floor. The first thing that hit her wasn't the luxury, it was the noise. Conversations in dozens of alien languages filled the air, mixing with the gentle hum of anti-gravity platforms carrying wealthy passengers and the soft chimming of credit transfers happening every few seconds. This wasn't just a space station, it was a floating palace for the galaxy's elite. Hannah had seen wealth before during her military service, but nothing like this. The walls curved gracefully overhead, made from some kind of living crystal that shifted colors with the mood lighting. Holographic art pieces floated in midair, showing scenes from famous battles and exotic planets. Everything screamed money, the kind of money that could buy entire star systems. She watched a group of Zentarian nobles glide past on hover platforms, their insect-like bodies adorned with jeweled armor that probably cost more than an entire military pension. One of them noticed her staring and clicked its mandibles in what she recognized as laughter, saying something to its companions in their chitting language. They all turned to look at her, their compound eyes glinting with amusement. Hannah had dealt with alien superiority complexes before. During the border wars, she'd served alongside dozens of species, earning their respect the hard way with her rifle and results. But this was different. Here, she wasn't Captain Lee, decorated sniper with 47 confirmed kills. Here, she was just another human trying to fit into a world that clearly wasn't made for her kind. A massive Krathian businessman waddled past, his 6 arms juggling multiple holographic displays showing stock prices from across the galaxy. His skin had the bluish tint that came from breathing processed atmosphere for too long, and his clothes were made from fabric that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. He barely glanced at her, but she caught the slight curl of his lip, the universal expression of disgust. The corridor stretched ahead like something from a fevered dream. Floating platforms carried alien dignitaries between levels, while robotic servants with bodies like flowing metal attended to every need. She passed a group of human businessmen in expensive suits, their augmented eyes glowing softly as they processed market data directly into their brains. Even her own species looked alien here, modified and enhanced until they barely resembled the soldiers she'd served with. A soft musical tone announced her approach to the celestial shooting range, and the corridor opened into a vast atrium. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, filled with what looked like actual stars, though she suspected they were just very expensive holograms. In the center of the space, a massive holographic display showed the current shooting records, with names in scripts she couldn't read and scores that seemed impossible. The entrance to the range itself was guarded by 2 Vorthic sentries, each standing nearly 9 feet tall. Their forearms ended in hands that could probably crush her skull without effort, and their obsidian black skin seemed to absorb the light around them. Red eyes tracked her movement as she approached, and she could feel them analyzing her, cataloging every detail about her weapons and capabilities. One of them spoke in heavily accented Standard, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "State your business, human." "I'm here to use the shooting range," Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady. She'd learned long ago that showing fear to predator species only made them more aggressive. The Vorthic exchanged glances, their eyes flickering with what might have been amusement. "You have clearance, I have credits. Inside the range." The air practically vibrated with energy, plasma rifles discharged with sounds like thunder, while quantum disruptors made the strange warbling noise that always reminded her of whale songs. The smell was different to ozone from energy weapons, the metallic scent of ionized air, and something else she couldn't identify. That made her nose itch. The reception area was a marvel of alien engineering. The desk seemed to be grown rather than built, its organic curves housing technology that probably required a small fusion reactor to power. Behind it sat a Kalani female, her blue skin marked with the intricate tattoos that indicated high social rank among her people. Her three eyes moved independently, allowing her to watch multiple displays while still keeping track of approaching customers. Hannah approached the desk, very aware of how her simple military surplus clothes looked next to the exotic fabrics and living metals worn by the other patrons. Her rifle case, made from genuine earth leather and worn soft by years of use, probably looked like a museum piece to these people. "Excuse me," she said, placing her hands flat on the counter. "I'd like to use the range." The receptionist's three eyes focused on her with the slow, deliberate movement of someone trying to process an unexpected situation. Her gaze traveled from Hannah's face to her clothes, then to the rifle case, lingering there with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry," the alien said, her accent giving the words a musical quality. "But this facility requires a membership of 10 million galactic credits." And she paused, her center eye focusing on the rifle case while the other two continued to study Hannah's face. "We only accommodate advanced energy weapons. Projectile weapons haven't been used in civilized space for over a century." The words stung more than Hannah expected. Her rifle had saved her life more times than she could count, had put food on her family's table, had earned her respect in the darkest corners of the galaxy. To have it dismissed as uncivilized felt like a personal insult, but she didn't let the anger show. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small crystalline card, placing it gently on the counter. The card was warm to the touch, its surface swirling with patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. "I believe this covers it," she said simply. The receptionist picked up the card with two of her hands while the third operated the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the scanner's display lit up like a small sun, numbers scrolling past too fast to read. The Kalani's three eyes went wide, then wider, her blue skin actually paling to a lighter shade. The numbers on the display stabilized, showing an account balance that made Hannah one of the wealthiest individuals in known space. It was money earned through blood and sacrifice, payment for services rendered in places where civilization was just a word people used to feel better about themselves. "Of course, Captain Lee," the receptionist said, her voice now carrying the respectful tone reserved for the truly powerful. "Right this way. Would you prefer a private lane, or will the general range suffice?" As they walked toward the firing lanes, Hannah could feel eyes following her. Word traveled fast in a place like this, and she suspected that within minutes, every patron in the range would know about the mysterious human with the ancient weapon and the impossible credit balance. She smiled grimly. Let them stare. They were about to learn something about the species that had clawed its way up from a single world to spread across the galaxy. They were about to discover why humans were still here, still fighting, still winning, even when the odds said they should have given up long ago. The real show was about to begin. The firing deck stretched out like a miniature battlefield, with 30 individual lanes separated by energy barriers that shimmered like heat waves. Each lane was equipped with holographic target systems that could simulate everything from charging Krillian war beasts to enemy starfighters diving through asteroid fields. The noise was incredible, a constant symphony of alien weapons unleashing destruction in controlled bursts. Hannah stepped onto the main deck and immediately felt the change in atmosphere. Conversations didn't stop, but they got quieter, more pointed. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement as she made her way toward the equipment lockers. The leather rifle case on her shoulder seemed to glow under the attention, marking hers different, as less than the sophisticated beings round her. At lane 7, Prince Kral held court like the royalty he was. The hegemony noble stood 8 feet tall, his reptilian features sharp and predatory. His scales shifted color from deep purple to silver as he moved, a sign of excitement among his species. In his four-fingered hands, he cradled a weapon that looked more like a piece of art than a tool of war. The plasma cannon was beautiful in the way that only extremely expensive things could be. Its surface was polished to mirror brightness, with veins of some exotic metal running through it like lightning frozen in place. When he raised it to fire, the weapon hummed with barely contained energy, and the air around it shimmered with heat distortion. "Watch this, my friends," Prince Kral announced, his voice carrying easily over the range noise. He spoke in accented standard, but his tone was that of someone used to being the center of attention. The hegemony's latest military technology, adapted for sport. The target materialized in the Lena holographic representation of a Terran assault shuttle, complete with defensive systems and evasive maneuvers. It darted and weaved through a simulated asteroid field, moving at speeds that would challenge even military-grade targeting systems. Prince Kral didn't even seem to aim. The weapon's AI system took over, tracking the target with inhuman precision. Crosshairs appeared in the air, projected directly onto his retinas through his combat implants. The plasma cannon charged with a sound like thunder building in the distance, then discharged in a brilliant lance of superheated matter. The holographic shuttle didn't just disappear, it exploded in a shower of realistic debris. The simulation, complete down to the way the wreckage tumbled through space. The crowd around Prince Kral erupted in applause, their various appendages clapping, clicking, or vibrating according to their species' customs. "Magnificent," breathed a colony diplomat, her 3 eyes reflecting the dying light of the plasma discharge. Such precision, such power. That's when Ambassador Vex noticed Hannah. The creature from the outer rings was something out of a nightmare, roughly humanoid, but wrong in every detail. His skin was the color of old bones, stretched tight over a frame that seemed to thin too. Support life, tentacles grew from his back like a twisted crown, each one ending in sensory organs that could taste fear and excitement in the air around him. "Oh, look," Vex said, his voice carrying the amused tone of someone who'd found unexpected entertainment, another human with their primitive toys. His tentacles writhed with what Hannah recognized as laughter among his species, the tips glowing faintly with bioluminescence. The comment rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Conversations paused as aliens turned to look at the human woman setting up at lane 15. Some of them had never seen a projectile weapon outside of a museum, and the sight of Hannah's rifle case drew stares of genuine curiosity mixed with condescension. "Do they still use those ancient projectile weapons?" continued a Zentarian noble, his insect-like features clicking with amusement. "I thought they'd evolved beyond such crude tools." Kim Doyan winced at the attention. The human tech mogul was everything. Hannah wasn't. Sleek, augmented, integrated intergalactic society. His clothes were made from smart fabric that adjusted to environmental conditions, and his eyes glowed softly with the light of neural interfaces processing data streams from across the galaxy. To him, Hannah represented everything embarrassing about humanity's past. Some still cling to the old ways, he said, shaking his head in a way that was meant to distance himself from her. "It's quite pathetic, really. We've moved beyond such primitive methods." His voice carried just a hint of desperation, the sound of someone trying too hard to fit in with beings who would never truly accept him. Park Min-soo, another human billionaire standing nearby, nodded in agreement. The military still uses some projectile weapons for specialized applications, but for sport, it's like showing up to a starship race in a chemical rocket. Hannah ignored the comments and opened a rifle case with practiced movements. Inside, nestled in foam that had been cut to fit its exact dimensions, lay her M2010. The weapon was a study in contrasts, ancient design married to modern materials. Crude by galactic standards but refined by generations of human warfare, the stock was made from genuine earth walnut. Worn smooth by countless hands over 2 centuries of use, every scratch and dent told a story of battles fought and won. Of desperate situations where only skill and determination had made the difference. Between life and death, the metal surfaces bore the patina of age and use, but underneath the wear, the weapon was as solid as the day it had been forged. As she began her assembly routine, checking each component with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times, the comments from the crowd grew louder and more pointed. "Look at that relic," Prince Krul's voice boomed across the range, drawing even more attention to Hannah's lane. His reptilian features were arranged in what passed for a smile among his species, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I wager she can't hit a stationary target at 50 meters with that antique." A betting pool formed spontaneously, as it always did when the wealthy gathered to watch someone else's potential humiliation. Credits flowed through the air via holographic transfers, the amounts climbing rapidly as more aliens joined in the speculation. "Make it interesting," Ambassador Vex replied, his tentacles practically dancing with excitement. "I say she doesn't hit anything at all. Those projectile weapons require actual skill to use something these primitive humans lack." The Zentorian noble clicked his mandibles in agreement. "The weapon probably doesn't even function. It belongs in a museum, not on a firing range." More laughter rippled through the crowd, the sound taking different forms depending on the species. Some clicked, others whistled, and a few made sounds that had no human equivalent. But the meaning was universal. They were laughing at her, at humanity, at everything she represented. Hannah finished assembling her rifle and ran her hand along its length, feeling the familiar comfort of wood and steel. Around her, the crowd continued to grow as word spread through the range. Aliens abandoned their own shooting to watch the show, expecting to see a human embarrass herself and, by extension, her entire species. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the casual cruelty of beings who had never known what it meant to fight for survival with nothing but skill and determination. They saw her weapon as primitive, her methods as outdated, her presence as amusing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The betting pool had reached astronomical proportions, with odds heavily favoring complete failure on her part. Prince Krul had wagered a fortune that she wouldn't hit a single target. Ambassador Vex had bet even more that her weapon would malfunction entirely. As Hannah settled into her firing position, the crowd fell silent, preparing to witness what they assumed would be a spectacular demonstration of human inadequacy. Their expensive weapons hung forgotten in their hands as they focused on the show about to unfold. What they didn't understand was that they weren't watching a demonstration of human weakness. They were about to witness exactly why humanity had survived and thrived in a galaxy full of beings who thought they were superior. The real education was about to begin. The main firing deck was like stepping into an alien weapons expo. The space stretched out for what seemed like miles, with shooting lanes that could accommodate everything from tiny pixie energy slingers to massive Titan war cannons. The ceiling arched high overhead, covered in some kind of adaptive armor that absorbed stray shots and converted the energy into power for the station. Hannah walked across the polished floor, her boots making soft clicks that seemed incredibly loud compared to the silent hover steps of the alien patrons round her. The air tasted metallic and sharp, filled with the byproducts of exotic energy weapons firing at full power. Every few seconds, another brilliant flash would light up one of the lanes, followed by the distinctive wine crack of matter being converted to pure energy. At lane 7. Prince Kral was putting on quite the show. The hegemony royal stood like a living statue, his scales shifting through colors that had no names in human languages. His weapon looked less like a gun and more like a piece of crystallized lightning, the plasma cannon was easily 6 feet long, its surface covered in patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Around him, a crowd of the galaxy's elite had gathered like moths to a flame. There were Krathian business leaders with their 6 arms gesturing wildly as they discussed stock prices, Centaurian nobles whose insect features clicked with excitement, and even a few Vorthic military officers whose presence made the air feel heavier just by being there. "Observe," Prince Kral announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to rule star systems, the Hegemony Mark 7 plasma projector. No targeting computer in the galaxy can match its precision, the target that materialized in his lane wasn't just a simple bullseye. It was a full holographic simulation of a Terran battle cruiser, complete with point defense systems and evasive maneuvers. The ship image banked and rolled through a 3-dimensional obstacle course, moving at speeds that would have challenged a real pilot. Prince Kral raised his weapon with practiced ease. The plasma cannon's AI system immediately went to work, scanning the target, calculating trajectories, predicting movement patterns. Crosshairs appeared in the air around the target, visible to everyone through the lane's display system. The weapon hummed with building energy, a sound like distant thunder rolling across mountains. When he fired, the effect was spectacular. A lance of superheated plasma, bright as a small star, reached out and touched the holographic cruiser. The ship didn't just disappear, it exploded in a shower of realistic debris, complete with secondary explosions and spinning wreckage that slowly faded as the simulation ended. The crowd erupted in appreciation. Different species showed approval in different ways. Some clapped, others made harmonic sounds, and a few simply changed color to show pleasure. But the message was universal. They were impressed. 14.7 seconds from target acquisition to destruction, announced the Ranger's AI system in a voice that somehow sounded bored despite being artificial. New personal record for Prince Kral. That's when Ambassador Vex noticed Hannah setting up at lane 15. The creature from the outer rings was something that would have given human children nightmares. His body was roughly humanoid but stretched. Wrong. Like someone had taken a person and pulled them through a funhouse mirror. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seemed to long for any natural anatomy. But it was the tentacles that really drew attention. 8 of them grew from his shoulders and back like a crown of flesh, each one ending in a cluster of sensory organs that could taste emotions in the air. Right now, they were practically glowing with malicious amusement. "Oh, look," Vex said, his voice carrying the musical quality that made his species such effective diplomats. Another human with their primitive toys. His tentacles writhed as he spoke, the tips lighting up with bioluminescent patterns that his species used for emphasis. The comments spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Conversations paused as dozens of alien eyes turned toward Hannah. Some had never seen a human projectile weapon outside of historical displays, and the sight of a rifle case drew stares that ranged from curious to contemptuous. A colony merchant, a blue skin marked with the tattoos of the trading guilds, leaned over to her companion. "Do humans still use kinetic weapons? I thought they'd evolved beyond such crude methods centuries ago." "Apparently not all of them," replied a Centaurian diplomat, his mandibles clicking with what passed for laughter among his kind. "Some species are slower to adapt than others." Kim Do-yeon felt his face burn with embarrassment. The human tech mogul had spent decades building his reputation in galactic society, proving that humans could be just as sophisticated as any alien species. His augmented eyes glowed softly as neural interfaces fed him real-time data from markets across the galaxy. His clothes were made from smart fabrics that could adapt to any environment, and his very presence radiated the kind of success that money could buy. To him, Hannah represented everything he'd tried to leave behind: the crude, violent past of humanity that made other species look down on them as primitive barbarians. "Some still cling to the old ways," he said, his voice carefully modulated to show disapproval. "It's quite pathetic, really. We've moved beyond such primitive methods." He gestured toward his own weapon, a sleek energy pistol that probably cost more than most people's homes. Park Min-soo nodded in agreement. Another human success story. He'd made his fortune in interstellar shipping and had spent millions on genetic modifications to make himself more acceptable to alien clients. His skin had a slight blue tint from treatments designed to help him better tolerate different atmospheric conditions. And his eyes had been replaced with artificial ones that could see across multiple spectrums. The military still uses some projectile weapons for specialized applications, he said, trying to sound knowledgeable. But for sport, it's like bringing a stone axe to a laser fight. Hannah ignored the commentary and opened a rifle case with movements that were almost ritualistic in their precision. Inside, cradled in foam that had been cut to fit its exact dimensions, lay her M2010. The weapon was a paradox, ancient in design but refined by 2 centuries of human warfare. The stock was carved from genuine earth walnut, its surface worn smooth by the hands of dozens of snipers who had carried it through battles across the galaxy. Every nick and scratch told a story. There was the gouge from shrapnel on Kepler-440b, the burn mark from plasma backwash during the siege of New Geneva, and the worn spot where countless thumbs had rubbed the wood while waiting for the perfect shot. The barrel was a work of art in itself, machined to tolerances that would have been impossible when the design was first created. The rifling inside was cut in a spiral pattern that had been perfected through centuries of trial and error, each groove calculated to give the projectile the perfect spin for maximum accuracy. As she began her pre-firing routine, checking each component with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before, the comments from the crowd grew louder and more pointed. "Look at that relic." Prince Crow's voice boomed across the range. His reptilian features ranged in what passed for amusement among his species. His scales had shifted to a golden color that indicated pleasure at finding new entertainment. "I wager she can't hit a stationary target at 50 meters with that museum piece." The betting pool formed spontaneously, as it always did when the wealthy gathered to watch potential humiliation unfold. Holographic displays appeared in the air showing odds and credit flows as more aliens joined in the speculation about Hannah's performance. "Make it interesting," Ambassador Vex replied, his tentacles practically dancing with excitement. The sensory organs at their tips were fully extended, tasting the anticipation in the air like fine wine. "I say she doesn't hit anything at all. Those antique weapons require manual skill, something these humans obviously lack." A Krathian arms dealer, his 6 hands gesturing wildly, jumped into the conversation. "I've studied Terran military history. Their projectile weapons were effective in primitive conflicts, but against modern targets, impossible. The ballistics are too slow, too predictable, plus added a Vorthok military observer, his massive frame making the aliens round him look like children. The ammunition is limited. What happens when she runs out of bullets? Our weapons draw power directly from the station's fusion core." The laughter that followed took many forms. Some species clicked, others hummed. and a few made sounds that had no equivalent in human language. But the meaning was universal. They found the entire situation hilarious. More aliens abandoned their own shooting to watch the show developing at Lane 15. Word was spreading through the Rangers' communication networks, and patrons from other levels were starting to arrive to witness what promised to be an entertaining display of human inadequacy. Hannah finished assembling her rifle and ran her palm along its length, feeling the familiar comfort of wood and steel. The weapon felt alive in her hands, like an extension of her own body. She'd carried it through hell zones where the very air could kill you. Used it to put food on her family's table when military pensions weren't enough. And trusted it with her life more times than she could count. Around her, the crowd continued to grow as the betting pool reached astronomical proportions. Prince Kral had wagered his personal fortune that she wouldn't hit a single target. Ambassador Vex had bet even more that her weapon would malfunction entirely. The stakes kept climbing as more aliens threw their credits into what they saw as the safest bet in the galaxy. What they didn't understand was that they weren't looking at a primitive human with an obsolete weapon. They were looking at a predator who had survived in places where their advanced technology would have been useless, where only skill, determination, and an intimate understanding of physics could mean the difference between life and death. The show was about to begin, and they were about to learn why humans had earned their place among the stars. Range Master Phil emerged from the control booth like a walking mountain of muscle and scars. The Kithra warrior stood 8 feet tall and was built like a fusion reactor designed for maximum intimidation. His skin was the color of gunmetal, crossed with ritual scars that told the story of 100 battles across a dozen star systems. Each scar was a victory, each mark a conquered enemy. His forearms moved with practiced precision as he operated the range controls, each limb capable of crushing a human skull without effort. The Kithra were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate warriors, a species that had conquered entire sectors through sheer physical superiority and tactical brilliance. Having one as a range master was like having a living weapon overseeing target practice. "You want the standard course?" Thal asked, his voice like grinding stone. His eyes, solid black without any visible pupils, focused on Hannah with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Or perhaps something more appropriate for your equipment. The insult was clear. But Hannah had dealt with warrior cultures before. During the border wars, she'd served alongside Kithra shock troops, and had learned that they respected only one thing: results. "Give me your hardest course," she replied, her voice steady despite the mountain of alien muscle looming over Thal's. Mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The nightmare sequence it is. Fair warning. Human, this course has broken AI targeting systems worth more than your entire planet's gross domestic product." He moved to the master control panel, a holographic interface that looked more like the command center of a battleship than a shooting range controller. His four hands worked simultaneously, entering commands that made the air around them hum with building energy. "The nightmare sequence," he announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying easily across the range. "Designed by Kithra military engineers to challenge the most advanced targeting systems in the galaxy. Only 12 beings have ever completed it successfully, and all of them were using quantum-assisted aiming systems." The range began to transform round Hannah's Lane. What had been a simple shooting gallery became something out of a fevered dream. The walls dissolved into swirling patterns of light and shadow. The floor became transparent, revealing a drop into what looked like the void of space itself. Complete with swirling nebulae and distant stars, barriers materialized out of thin air, not just simple walls, but complex geometric shapes that rotated and shifted in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Some were solid, others were energy fields that bent light round them. A few seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly process. Gravity fields activated throughout the space, creating pockets where up and down became meaningless. Objects floated in impossible spirals, following paths that defied every law of physics Hannah had ever learned. The air itself became thick and sluggish in some areas, while in others it seemed to disappear entirely. Then the targets appeared. They weren't simple bullseyes or even holographic enemies. These were geometric nightmares that existed in a constant state of flux, some targets phased in and out of reality, visible for only microseconds at a time. Others split into multiple copies that moved in opposite directions before merging back together. A few seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, flickering between possible positions faster than the eye could follow. The targets follow. No predictable pattern, Thull explained, his voice carrying a note of professional pride. They utilize true quantum randomness, making it impossible for any computer to predict their movements. The barriers shift every 1.3 seconds, creating new paths and closing others. The gravity fields rotate through 17 different configurations, each one designed to throw off even the most sophisticated ballistics calculations. Energy beams immediately began lancing through the air as the other aliens' weapons attempted to track the targets. Prince Krull's plasma cannon whined as its AI system struggled to lock onto anything solid. The weapon's targeting computer was running millions of calculations per second, trying to predict where a target might be, but the quantum randomness made it impossible. Ambassador Vex's weapon, a crystalline device that fired concentrated dark matter, managed to clip one target before it phased out of existence. The dark matter round passed through the space where the target had been, leaving a brief distortion in the air before dissipating harmlessly against the ranger's containment field. "This should be amusing," Kim Do-yeon whispered to Park Min-soo. Both humans standing close enough to the action to have a perfect view of what they expected to be a disaster. "Watch her waste all 10 shots on the first barrier. That antique doesn't even have a targeting computer." Park Min-soo nodded, his artificially enhanced eyes already calculating the angles and finding them impossible, even if she could somehow compensate for the gravity distortions manually. The targets are moving too fast for biological reflexes to track. Other aliens in the crowd were placing additional bets. The odds against Hannah climbing higher with each passing second. A Zenturian mathematician was running probability calculations in his head, his mandibles clicking as he processed the numbers. The statistical probability of success with a projectile weapon in this environment approaches 0, he announced to his companions. Even if she possessed superhuman reflexes and perfect mathematical intuition, the quantum randomness alone makes successful targeting theoretically impossible. Hannah settled into her firing position, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle against her shoulder. The crowd's noise faded into background static as her mind entered the focused state that had kept her alive through countless battles. Her breathing slowed and deepened, each exhale releasing tension, each inhale bringing clarity. She had faced worse odds before, unkept for it to be. Enemy snipers had pinned down her unit in a chemical storm that turned the very air into acid. Visibility had been less than 10 meters, gravity was 30% higher than Earth normal, and the enemy had been using weapons that could punch through tank armor. But she'd found a way to fight back, using the storm itself to mask her position while picking off targets that existed only as brief muzzle flashes in the toxic fog. This was just another puzzle to solve. Her first shot rang out across the Ranger, sharp, clean crack that seemed almost primitive compared to the sophisticated whines and hums of the energy weapons round her. The sound cut through the air like a knife. Distinct and unmistakable, the bullet appeared to miss completely, sparking off a distant wall in a shower of tiny metal fragments. The spark was barely visible against the swirling patterns of the holographic environment, easy to dismiss as a complete failure. The crowd erupted in laughter. Different species expressed amusement in different ways, but the message was universal. The Krathian merchants clicked their mandibles in perfect harmony. The Xantorian nobles made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Even some of the Vorthik warriors, normally stoic to the point of being statue-like, allowed themselves slight expressions of amusement. "Told you so." Prince Kral slapped his scaled knee with enough force to dent armor plating, his weapon temporarily forgotten in his amusement. These humans and their obsolete technology. She couldn't hit the broadside of a space station with that relic. Ambassador Vex's tentacles writhed with malicious glee, their bioluminescent tips pulsing in patterns that his species used to express maximum satisfaction. I believe the human term is couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, though I suppose that assumes they know what a barn is. Hannah's second shot followed immediately, the rifle's action cycling with mechanical precision. Again, no visible impact on any target. The bullet seemed to disappear into the maze of shifting barriers and gravity wells. Her third shot came just seconds later. Another apparent miss, another spark against the containment walls. The laughter grew louder and more cruel. Aliens who had been focusing on their own shooting abandoned their lanes to watch the spectacle. Word was spreading through the station's communication networks, and more beings were arriving to witness what was being described as the most entertaining failure in the range's history. 3 shots, 3 misses, Kim Doyan announced loudly, enough for the nearby aliens to hear, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose predictions were being proven correct. At this rate, she'll be out of ammunition before she figures out which end of the weapon to point at the targets. But a few observers were paying closer attention. Range Master Thol's eyes were tracking not just Hannah's shots, but their points of impact. The Kithra warrior had survived 100 battles by understanding that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who appeared to be failing. A Vorthik military observer, her tactical implants recording every detail of the engagement, noticed something that made her pause. The humans' misses weren't random. Each impact point was precisely calculated. Each spark exactly where it needed to be to gather specific information about the environment. Hannah wasn't missing, she was learning. Each shot was a probe, a question asked of the maze itself. Where were the barriers solid? Where did the gravity fields create deflection zones? How did the quantum fluctuations affect ballistic trajectories? Her rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a scientific instrument, gathering data that no computer could process because no computer could think like a human sniper who had learned to turn the universe itself into her ally. The crowd continued to laugh, but the sound was about to die in their throats. They thought they were watching a failure, but they were actually witnessing something far more dangerous. A human predator learning to hunt in an alien environment. The real show was about to begin. The 4th shot shattered the universe as everyone knew it. Hannah's rifle cracked again, the sound now seeming less primitive and more like the voice of something ancient and deadly. The bullet streaked through the maze, moving at speeds that should have made precision impossible. But instead of sparking uselessly against another wall, something incredible happened. The projectile struck a rotating barrier at exactly the moment when its angle was perfect. The metal surface, designed to deflect energy weapons, became a launching pad. The bullet ricocheted in a perfect arc, its trajectory bending through space in a way that made several alien physicists start frantically checking their instruments. The target it struck had been flickering in and out of existence, visible for only milliseconds at a time. According to every computer simulation run by the Ranger's AI systems, hitting it was mathematically impossible. The timing window was too narrow, the angle too precise, the calculations too complex for any biological mind to process. But the bullet found its mark anyway. The target exploded in a shower of holographic fragments. Its destruction confirmed by the ranger's monitoring systems. A soft chime echoed through the space, the sound that indicated a successful hit on a target rated as impossible by the course designers. The laughter died like someone had thrown a switch. Ambassador Vex's tentacles stopped their writhing dance, freezing in positions that showed shock among his species. His bioluminescent tips flickered uncertainly, the patterns disrupted by an emotion he rarely felt. Doubt. Lucky shot, he muttered. But his voice lacked the confidence it had carried. Just moments before, the sensory organs at the tips of his tentacles were tasting something new in the air, not the fear and embarrassment he'd expected from the human, but a cold, calculating focus that made his skin crawl. Prince Krul's reptilian features shifted, from amusement to confusion, his scales taking on the darker colors that indicated uncertainty among the hegemony nobility. His plasma cannon, which had seemed so advanced and sophisticated just minutes ago, suddenly felt clumsy in his hands. But the aliens in the crowd were already starting to rationalize what they'd seen. One lucky shot didn't mean anything. Probability dictated that even random firing would occasionally hit something. This was just an anomaly, a statistical quirk that proved nothing about human capabilities. Then came the fifth shot. This time, Hannah's target was located behind 3 rotating barriers, each one spinning at a different speed and moving in a different plane. The barriers were synchronized in such a way that they never aligned to create a clear shot also. The course designers had thought. Hannah's bullet threaded through the gaps like it was following a predetermined path. It passed through the first opening just as the barrier rotated away, slipped between the second and third barriers during the brief moment when their movements created a window, and struck its target dead center. The target was another quantum randomized nightmare, existing in multiple probable positions simultaneously until the moment of impact forced it to choose one reality. The bullet found it anyway, as if Hannah had somehow calculated not just where it was, but where it would choose to be. The crowd began to murmur. Conversations in a dozen alien languages created a buzz of confusion and growing unease. This wasn't luck anymore. 2 impossible shots in a row suggested something else entirely. Kim Do-yeon felt his augmented neural interfaces struggling to process what he was seeing. His enhanced brain, capable of performing millions of calculations per second, couldn't figure out how Hannah was making these shots. The mathematical models all said it was impossible. The targeting data doesn't make sense. He whispered to Park Min-soo, his voice tight with confusion. The probability matrices are showing negative results. According to every simulation, those shots should have missed by several meters. The 6th shot defied not just probability, but physics itself. The target was positioned behind a gravity well that bent space-time in a localized area. Energy weapons had been trying to hit it for the past several minutes, their beams curving away from their intended paths as the distorted space redirected them harmlessly into the containment walls. Hannah's bullet entered the gravity field and seemed to curve impossibly, following a path that made several Centaurian physicists start chittering in distress. The projectile rode the edge of the gravity well like a starship using a planet's gravity to slingshot toward its destination. It accelerated through the distortion, gained speed and changed direction, and emerged from the other side with enough velocity to punch through a target that the energy weapon sensors couldn't even properly detect. "How is she doing this?" Park Min-soo whispered, his face pale beneath his artificial tan, his modified eyes, capable of seeing across multiple spectrums, were showing him something that shouldn't have been possible. The human woman wasn't using any advanced technology. wasn't accessing any computer systems, wasn't even looking at the targeting displays that showed the maze's layout. She was just shooting and hitting things that couldn't be hit. The seventh shot turned the impossible into the absurd. The bullet ricocheted off for different surfaces in rapid succession, each impact calculated to redirect the projectile toward its final destination. The first ricochet took it off a rotating barrier, adding spin and changing its trajectory by exactly 37 degrees. The second bounce sent it through a gravity well that accelerated it beyond its original velocity. The third ricochet was the most impressive. The bullet struck a holographic target that existed only as hard light photons, solid enough to deflect the projectile but positioned in exactly the right spot to send it careening toward a target that had been hidden behind overlapping energy fields. The fourth and final bounce sent the bullet through a gap in the defenses that opened for exactly 0.3 seconds, just long enough for the projectile to slip through and destroy a target that the Course AI had labeled as theoretically unreachable. The eighth and ninth shots happened so quickly that they seemed like a single action. Hannah fired twice in rapid succession, the rifle's bolt action cycling faster than should have been humanly possible. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, muscle memory taking over from conscious thought. The first bullet struck what appeared to be empty space, but the impact triggered a cascade failure in one of the holographic barriers. The barrier flickered and died, creating an opening that lasted for less than a second. The second bullet was already in flight, timed perfectly to pass through the gap and strike a target that had been completely protected. Until that exact moment, the coordination required was staggering, not just hitting a moving target, but creating the opening for that target while the bullet was already in the air. The range fell completely silent except for the mechanical humming of the maze's generators and the soft whir of gravity field projectors. The alien weapons had stopped firing entirely, their operators too stunned to continue their own attempts at the course. Every eye in the place was fixed on the human woman who was systematically destroying their understanding of what was possible range. Master Thol's for hands moved across his instrument panels with increasing urgency. The Kithra warrior had seen combat across 100 worlds, had witnessed the most advanced military technology the galaxy had to offer. But the readings his instruments were showing him made no sense. 9 targets down, he announced, his voice carrying none of its earlier disdain. All targets were rated as impossible by our systems. Statistical probability of achieving this result through random chance is approximately 1 in 4 billion T. Rillion. The numbers hit the crowd like a physical blow. These weren't just lucky shots anymore. This was something else entirely. Something that challenged their basic understanding of how the universe worked. Prince Krul's plasma cannon hung forgotten in his hands, its advanced AI system still trying and failing to hit even a single target. The weapon that had seemed so sophisticated just minutes ago now looked clumsy and primitive compared to what the human was accomplishing with her ancient rifle. "There's no way she can complete the sequence," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His scales had shifted to the pale colors that indicated fear among his species. "The final target requires simultaneous hits from multiple angles. It's impossible for a single shooter." But even as he spoke, he was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his reptilian core. This human wasn't just hitting impossible targets, she was rewriting the rules of what counted as impossible. And if she could do that with 9 shots, what might she accomplish with the 10th? The betting pools had gone silent. No one was placing new wagers anymore. The aliens who had been so eager to mock human primitive technology were now staring at Hannah with something approaching, and in some cases, fear. They were beginning to realize that they weren't watching a demonstration of human inadequacy. They were witnessing something far more terrifying, a glimpse of why humanity had not just survived in a galaxy full of superior species, but had thrived. The final shot was coming. And everyone in the range knew that everything they thought they understood about humans was about to change forever. Hannah stood at the firing line, her rifle ready for the final shot. Round her, the alien crowd had fallen into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. 9 impossible targets. Down. 1 to go. But this wasn't just any target. This was the shot that had broken every advanced weapon system in the galaxy. The 10th target floated in the exact center of the maze, suspended in what looked like empty space, but was actually the most heavily defended position ever created. It sat inside a sphere of pure energy, protected by 7 different types of barriers that rotated in complex patterns round it. Each barrier was designed to stop a different kind of weapon: plasma, particle beams, dark matter rounds, even exotic matter projectiles. Gravity wells surrounded the target like invisible whirlpools, each one strong enough to bend light itself. Any projectile entering the field would be pulled in multiple directions at once, its path twisted into impossible spirals that led nowhere. Force fields overlapped in geometric patterns that created dead zones where matter simply couldn't exist. The alien weapons had been trying to hit this target for over an hour. Prince Kroll's plasma cannon had fired 17 times, each shot bending away harmlessly as the gravity wells redirected the superheated matter into the containment walls. Ambassador Vex's dark matter weapon had simply had its projectiles absorbed by one of the energy barriers, the exotic ammunition disappearing as if it had never existed. Range Master Thol's instruments showed the target's specifications in holographic displays that floated through the firing lane. The data was overwhelming: 17 different defensive systems, each one capable of stopping military-grade weapons. The mathematical probability of hitting the target was so small that the computers displayed it in scientific notation with dozens of zeros. But Hannah wasn't looking at the displays. She was studying the maze itself, watching the patterns of movement, observing how the different systems interacted with each other. Her sniper training had taught her to see connections that others missed, to find the weakness in any defense, and that's when she saw it. The maze wasn't random. Every barrier, every gravity well, every force field was positioned precisely to create maximum protection for the target. But that same precision had created something the designers never intended: a single point of structural weakness that could bring down the entire system. She raised her rifle and aimed at what appeared to be completely empty space, several meters away from any visible target or barrier. The crowd stirred restlessly. After 9 impossible shots, they expected the finale to be spectacular, not a shot into nothing. "What is she doing?" Kim Do-yeon whispered, his enhanced eyes scanning the area where Hannah was aiming. His neural implants showed nothing there. No targets, no barriers, just empty space filled with harmless particles. Park Min-soo shook his head in confusion. "She's lost it. The pressure finally got to her. She's shooting at shadows." But Range Master Thol was watching his instruments more carefully. The Kithra warrior had survived 100 battles by paying attention to details others missed. His scanners were showing something strange: a microscopic stress point in the outer barrier's matrix. Invisible to normal sensors, but detectable if you knew exactly where to look. Hannah's breathing slowed to almost nothing. Time seemed to stretch as she calculated angles, trajectories, and timing with a precision that no computer could match. This wasn't just about hitting a target anymore. This was about turning the entire maze into a weapon. She pulled the trigger. The rifle's sharp crack echoed through the range one final time. The bullet streaked through the air, moving faster than most alien eyes could track. It struck what seemed like empty space, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the mat began. The bullet hit the microscopic stress point in the outer barrier's energy matrix. A flaw so small that it was invisible to every scanner in the range. But Hannah had seen it, calculated its exact position, and placed her shot with surgical precision. The barrier didn't just crack, it shattered along predetermined stress lines that had been built into its structure during construction. The fragments of the destroyed barrier became projectiles themselves, each piece ricocheting in directions that Hannah had calculated down to the millimeter. The first fragment struck a gravity well generator, causing it to overload and reverse its polarity, instead of pulling objects in. It began pushing them away with tremendous force. The second fragment hit another barrier at precisely the right angle to fracture it into 7 smaller pieces. Those pieces struck 7 different targets simultaneously: gravity generators, force field projectors, and energy barrier controllers. Each impact was timed perfectly to create a cascade failure that spread through the entire defensive system, like dominoes falling in a perfectly choreographed sequence. The maze began to collapse inward. Barriers that had seemed impenetrable moments before folded like paper. Gravity wells that had twisted space itself suddenly reversed direction, creating corridors where none had existed. Force fields that had been solid as steel flickered and died. The air filled with the sound of systems failing, the whine of overloaded generators, the crack of energy barriers shorting out, the deep thrum of gravity wells collapsing back into normal space. Sparks flew from control panels as the maze's AI systems struggled to compensate for failures they couldn't understand. In the center of the chaos, protected by 7 layers of the galaxy's most advanced defensive technology, the final target sat exposed for exactly 0.3 seconds. It hung in empty space with nothing between it and the outside world. But Hannah hadn't fired just one bullet, she had unleashed dozens. The fragments of the barriers she destroyed were still moving, still ricocheting, still following the path she'd calculated. They converged on the target from 6 different angles simultaneously, striking it with the combined force of a military bombardment. The target exploded in a shower of light and dissolving holograms. The maze's defensive systems tried desperately to reset themselves, overloaded completely. Energy barriers flickered and died. Gravity wells collapsed into normal space with sounds like reality tearing. Force fields dissolved into harmless static. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, nothing remained but empty space and the soft ping of the Ranger's systems confirming a successful hit. The silence that followed was absolute. Prince Krau stood, frozen, his plasma cannon hanging useless in his hands. His reptilian features had gone completely pale, scales shifting to colors that indicated shock and disbelief among his species. The weapon that had seemed so advanced, so sophisticated, so superior to human technology, now looked like a child's. Troy. Ambassador Vex's tentacles had gone completely rigid, their bioluminescent tips dark for the first time anyone could remember. The creature from the Outer Rings, who had built his reputation on understanding the impossible, stared at the empty space where the maze had been with something approaching religious awe. Range Master Thul checked his instruments 3 times before he could trust what he was seeing. Every sensor in the range confirmed the same impossible result. The human had not just hit the unhittable target. She had destroyed the entire defensive system in the process. How? He whispered, his voice barely audible even in the perfect silence. The betting pools began to transfer automatically. 50 million credits from Prince Krell, 75 million from Ambassador Vex, hundreds of millions from dozens of other aliens who had been so certain that human technology was primitive and obsolete. Kim Doyon's hands shook as he authorized his own transfer, watching his fortune disappear into Hannah's account. Pog Mensah stood beside him, his artificially enhanced brain still trying to process what had happened. Still failing to understand how one human with an ancient weapon had accomplished what their most advanced technology, COULD and single quotes T. Hannah shouldered. A rifle with the same casual precision she'd shown throughout the entire demonstration. The weapon that had seemed so primitive just an hour ago now looked like something else entirely not primitive, but refined. Not obsolete, but timeless. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the stunned crowd of aliens and humans who had learned something about their universe that they would never forget. "You saw obstacles," she said, her voice carrying easily across the range. "I saw opportunities. Your machines can calculate trajectories and predict movements, but they can't think. They can't adapt. They can't look at a defense designed to stop them and figure out how to turn it into their greatest weapon." She smiled, and for the first time since entering the range, she looked truly happy. "That's why humans are still here," she continued. "While empires rise and fall around us, we don't just survive in a hostile universe, we find a way to win. We find a way to take whatever the galaxy throws at us and make it work for us instead of against." U.S. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the galaxy's elite to contemplate a lesson that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be human. They had come to watch a primitive species embarrass itself with obsolete technology instead. They had witnessed something far more profound, a demonstration of why humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. In the Ranger's permanent records, the shot would be logged as the sole solution, named after the city where Captain Lehana had first learned that sometimes the best way forward was to create your own path, no matter how impossible it seemed. The lesson would spread throughout the galaxy within days. Carried by the aliens who had witnessed it firsthand, it would become a reminder that underestimating humans was not just foolish, it was dangerous, because somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, other humans were watching. Other humans were learning. Other humans were preparing to show the galaxy that the most primitive weapon in the right hands could be more dangerous than all the advanced technology in the universe. The end.